There are some children who come into the world already carrying something. You can't see it. You can't touch it. But if you pay close enough attention, you can feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the first cloud appears. He was one of those children. He grew up in a small house in a neighborhood where the walls were thin and the worries were thick. The kind of place where you learn early that money doesn't stretch as far as the month does. His father worked long hours at a factory. His mother cleaned offices at night and came home before sunrise, her hands rough, her eyes tired, but always, with something warm to say to her children before they left for school. They weren't a family with extras. There were no music lessons, no instruments in the corner, no piano gathering dust in the hallway the way there might be in wealthier homes. What they had was a small radio that sat on top of the refrigerator, and on Sunday mornings, his mother would turn it on low while she cooked. That was the closest thing to music in the house. But the boy listened to that radio the way other children watch television. Completely. Without blinking. When a melody came on, even a simple one, something in his face would change. He'd go still. His lips would move slightly, as if he were whispering something back to the song. His older sister noticed it first. She told their mother one evening, quietly, "The way you share something you're not quite sure how to explain. He doesn't just hear the music," she said. "He goes somewhere." The neighbor 2 doors down had an old upright piano. It had seen better decades. Several keys had yellowed and one stuck completely when pressed too hard. But to the boy, when he first sat in front of it at age 7, invited in by the neighbor who had noticed him pressing his ear to the wall on more than one occasion, it might as well have been the grandest instrument ever built. He touched the keys slowly at first, one by one, like he was meeting someone for the first time and didn't want to rush it. Then something shifted. His right hand found a pattern. Then his left hand joined in. Within 20 minutes of sitting at that piano for the very first time in his life, he played back imperfectly, but unmistakably a melody he had only heard twice on the radio. The neighbor stood in the doorway of her own kitchen and did not move for a long time. She called his mother that same evening. His mother came over, still in her work clothes, still carrying the small bag she took to the office every night. She stood behind her son and watched him play. She didn't say a word. When he finished and looked up at her, there were tears on her face that she quickly wiped away with the back of her wrist. She kissed the top of his head and thanked the neighbor. On the walk home, she held his hand tighter than usual. The next few months were not easy to manage financially, but she found a way. She always found a way. A music teacher in town gave discounted lessons to children from low-income families on Saturday mornings. She signed him up before the week was over. She walked him there herself every Saturday, waited outside on a wooden bench for the full hour, and walked him home. She never once complained about the time or the cost. She just showed up. That was her way. Teacher. A quiet man who had studied music formally in his younger years and now spent his retirement passing it on, recognized the boy immediately for what he was. Not a student who needed to be taught. A student who needed to be pointed in the right direction and then set free. Lessons that were supposed to take months took weeks. Material that other children struggled with for a year, he absorbed in a matter of sessions. It wasn't arrogance. There was nothing showy about it. He simply heard the music differently than other people did. Not as individual notes, but as one living, breathing thing. By the time he was 9, he was playing pieces that students twice his age were still working through. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. People would stop his mother at the corner shop or after church to ask about him. She would smile and say he was doing well, and change the subject. She was proud, deeply, privately proud. But she was also practical. Pride didn't pay the bills. And the bills, as always, were waiting. The year he turned 10, everything got harder. His father's factory cut hours across the board. What had already been a tight budget became almost impossibly thin. The family stopped buying things that weren't completely necessary. Meals got simpler. The heating stayed off longer into the evenings. His mother took on an extra shift 2 nights a week, which meant she got home even later and slept even less. The house felt different that year. Not broken, but stretched, like a piece of cloth pulled too far in too many directions. He noticed all of it. Children always notice, even when adults believe they don't. He noticed the way his parents spoke in low voices after he went to bed. He noticed the small stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter that seemed to grow rather than shrink. He noticed that his mother had stopped turning the radio on in the mornings. Whether that was because she didn't have time anymore, or because she just didn't have the energy for even that small joy, he didn't know. But he noticed. He kept going to his Saturday lessons. He kept practicing at the neighbor's house whenever she allowed it, which was often because she had grown fond of the sounds that filled her rooms on those afternoons it kept going. Even when things got harder, music was the one part of his life that felt stable, fixed, like something that couldn't be touched by any of the problems circling outside the door. Then one Tuesday afternoon in November, he came home from school, and the house was quieter than usual. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The other kind. He dropped his bag at the door and walked into the sitting room. The corner where the family's piano stood a second-hand upright they had bought 2 years earlier after months of saving. The one his mother had arranged as a birthday surprise was empty. Just an empty corner. A slightly different shade of color on the wall where the piano had blocked the light for 2 years. For small marks on the floor where the legs had stood. He stared at it for a long time. His mother came in from the kitchen. She didn't look at him right away. She dried her hands on a cloth and then sat down on the sofa and looked at her own hands instead. She said there were some bills that couldn't wait any longer. She said they would find a way to get another one someday. She said she was sorry. Her voice was steady and quiet. The way people speak when they've already cried about something privately and now have to speak about it plainly. He didn't cry. He sat down next to her and leaned his head against her arm and didn't say anything for a while. Later that night, in his room, he lay on his back and stared at the ceiling and played music in his head. He went through every piece he had learned, note by note, phrase by phrase. He stayed awake until very late doing it. When he finally fell asleep, his fingers were still moving against the mattress. Grief, when you're young, is strange. It doesn't always come out the way it does in adults. It doesn't always show up as sadness you can see. Sometimes it turns into something else. Entirely, something quieter and more determined. Something that looks, from the outside, almost like stubbornness. The morning after the piano was taken away, he got a piece of cardboard from behind the grocery bags in the kitchen. He found a marker. He sat at the kitchen table for over an hour and drew out a piano keyboard, all the white keys, all the black keys, everyone in the right position. He measured nothing. He had played the real thing enough times that his hands knew the width and spacing from memory. When he was done, he laid it flat on the table and placed his hands on it and began to practice. His sister walked in, saw what he was doing, and said nothing. She made herself a glass of water, looked at him for a moment, and went back to her room. Whatever she was feeling, she kept it to herself. Some things are too delicate to comment on. He kept that piece of cardboard under his bed. Every evening after homework he would pull it out and practice on it. Silently, pressing down on paper keys, his fingers working through pieces with the same focus and concentration as if the sound were actually coming out. What was remarkable was that he wasn't just going through the motions. He was hearing the music in his head as clearly as if a real piano were under his hands. Every note, every pause, every shift in volume. His mind had become the instrument. He started doing it at school too. During lunch, during free periods. Other children noticed, and some of them laughed. Because what does a boy pressing his fingers on a blank piece of paper look like if you don't understand what's happening? He ignored it without effort. He wasn't playing for them. He wasn't even playing for himself. Exactly. It was something more basic than that. More necessary. Like breathing. His teacher at school, not his music teacher, but his regular classroom teacher, noticed the cardboard keyboard one afternoon and called him aside after class. She wasn't unkind about it. She asked him quietly if he was all right. He said yes. She looked at him for a moment in that way adults do when they suspect the answer is more complicated than the one they received. And then she said something that stayed with him. She said that she had a piano at home that hadn't been played in years and that he was welcome to come and use it on Wednesday afternoons if he wanted to. She said it simply, without making a large gesture of it, and then handed his cardboard back to him and let him go. He showed up that Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that. And every Wednesday, for the next year and a half, he would sit down at her piano and play for the full afternoon, barely pausing between pieces, working through everything he had been rehearsing on cardboard and in his head for weeks. His teacher would read in the next room, the door open, listening. She never interrupted. She never applauded or commented. She just made sure the house was open and the piano was available, and that was enough. Sometimes the most important kind of help is the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return and doesn't make you feel small for needing it. What those months built in him was not just technical skill, though that deepened considerably. What those months built was something harder to name. A kind of inner certainty, a knowledge that no matter what was taken away from him on the outside, the music itself could not be removed. It lived somewhere in him that poverty could not reach, that circumstances could not enter, that no amount of difficulty could touch. The piano had been sold. The corner was empty, but his hands still remembered everything, and his mind had never once stopped playing. There is a particular kind of moment that changes a life. Not a loud moment, not one that announces itself with fireworks or drama, but a quiet, ordinary-looking moment that you only truly understand years later when you look back and realize everything was different after it. He would have several of those moments in the years that followed. But the first real one happened at a regional music festival when he was 15 years old, on a Tuesday evening in a hall that was only half full. He had signed up for the competition through his school. His classroom teacher, the same one who had opened her home and her piano to him for all those Wednesday afternoons, had heard about the festival through a notice pinned to the staff board and had quietly slid the entry form across his desk one morning without making a ceremony of it. He filled it in that same day and handed it back before the bell rang. There was no great announcement. No build-up, just a form, a deadline, and a date on the calendar. In the weeks before the festival, he practiced harder than he ever had, not out of nerves, exactly, but out of a kind of hunger. He finally had access to a proper piano at school. The music room had been unlocked for him during lunch breaks, after his teacher had put in a quiet word with the head of department, and he used every available minute. He would eat his lunch in 5 minutes flat, and spend the rest of the hour in that room with the door closed, working through his chosen piece until it stopped being something he played and became something he simply was. The night of the festival, he traveled to the venue on a bus with his teacher sitting beside him. She had brought a thermos of tea and offered him some. Declined. He spent most of the journey looking out the window, not at anything in particular, just looking, the way people do when their mind is somewhere music already lives. The hall was larger than anything he had performed in before. The stage had proper lights. The piano on it was a full-size concert grand, the kind he had only ever seen in photographs or on the small screen of the school computer when he had looked up recordings of famous pianists. He walked up to it during the soundcheck window, sat down, adjusted the bench, and played a single scale. The sound that came back at him was unlike anything he had experienced. Rich, deep, like the instrument was responding to him, not just receiving him. He sat very still for a moment after that single scale, both hands resting in his lap, and said nothing. When his turn came, the hall had filled a little more but was still far from packed. There were other parents, other competitors, a few teachers, and some people who had simply wandered in off the street because the doors were open and the evening was cold. A woman near the back was reading a program. 2 men near the side door were having a low conversation. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening audience in a mid-sized town, and nobody was particularly paying attention when the young boy from the modest neighborhood sat down at the grand piano and placed his hands on the keys. He played for 8 minutes. By the 3rd minute, the 2 men near the side door had stopped talking. By the 5th, the woman with the program had set it down on the empty seat beside her. By the 7th, several people who had been standing in the corridor outside had drifted in through the open doors and were standing along the back wall, not quite sure what had drawn them in, only knowing that something had. When he finished and lifted his hands from the keys, there was a pause. A genuine pause. The kind that is worth more than any immediate applause before the room responded. He won the festival. But that was almost beside the point. What mattered more was the woman who approached him afterward. She had been sitting 3 rows from the front and he hadn't noticed her during the performance, which was how it should be. She introduced herself as the director of a music conservatory in the city. She said she had come to the festival to watch a student of one of her colleagues compete, and that she had not expected to hear what she heard. She chose her words carefully, the way people do when they know they are saying something that matters. She asked him a few questions, not about technique, not about his history, but about how he experienced music, what it felt like from the inside. He answered her honestly, in plain language, the same way he answered any question he took seriously. She listened without interrupting. The conversation lasted a long time. His teacher waited nearby, drinking the rest of her thermos tea on a plastic chair, occasionally glancing over with an expression that was carefully neutral but whose eyes gave away something closer to Bellefontaine joy. When it was over, the conservatory director shook his hand and said she would be in touch. She was. The letter arrived 11 days later. A full scholarship. Tuition, materials, access to the practice room 7 days a week, everything covered. He read the letter once at the kitchen table, then folded it back along its original creases, set it down, and looked at his mother. She looked back at him. Then she picked it up and read it herself, slowly, word by word, as if she wanted to make absolutely certain of what it said. When she put it down, her hands were shaking slightly. Not from anything bad, just from the kind of feeling that has nowhere to go but out through your hands when it gets too large to keep inside. She pulled him into a hug and held on for a long time without saying anything. Some moments don't need words. This was one of them. The years at the conservatory changed him, not in the way that made him unrecognizable, but in the way that growing fully into something you already are always changes a person. He was still quiet, still more comfortable at the piano than anywhere else in a room, still the kind of person who listened more than he spoke and meant everything he said. But there was a confidence now that hadn't been there before. Not arrogance, nothing like that. Just the settled, unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly what they were made to do and has finally been given the space to do it properly. He worked harder than almost anyone around him, not because he was trying to prove something, but because he genuinely couldn't imagine spending his time any other way. While other students went out on Friday evenings, he stayed in the practice room. While others complained about difficult pieces, he treated difficulty the way you treat a locked door, not as a reason to turn back, but as a reason to look more carefully for the key. His teachers noted it. His peers noticed it. Most of them admired it, even the ones who would never admit it out loud. There were still hard times. A wrist injury in his second year that kept him away from the keys for 6 weeks. 6 weeks that felt, A-side letter-like, having a part of himself temporarily switched off. A period where self-doubt crept in quietly and made everything feel heavier than it should. A competition he entered in his third year, convinced he was ready, that he did not win. The long, honest conversation he had with himself afterward about where he still needed to grow. None of it broke him. All of it shaped him. By the time he finished at the conservatory, he had performed in venues across the country. His name had started to appear on programs alongside musicians he had once only read about. He gave a solo recital at a concert hall in the city that sold out 3 weeks in advance. His old classroom teacher came and sat in the 4th row. His mother sat beside her. His sister was there too, and their father, who had taken the evening off work for the first time in as long as any of them could remember. After the performance, he found them all waiting near the stage door, and he hugged each of them in turn, the same way he always had, without ceremony, without performance, hoosed honestly. But there's one evening that stands apart from all the concert halls, and all the applause, and all the scholarship letters, and the programs with his name printed neatly on them. One evening that the people who know him best speak of most often when his story comes up in conversation. His mother retired from her night cleaning job on a Friday in early spring. She had worked that job, and others like it, for the better part of 25 years. Her children arranged a small gathering at her home. Just family. Nothing big, the way she preferred things. There was food and some laughter, and the kind of ease that only exists between people who have been through hard times together and come out the other side still whole. Sometime in the afternoon, before the others arrived, he had arranged for something to be delivered to the house. A piano, an upright, well-made, and properly tuned, positioned carefully in the sitting room, in the exact corner where the old one had stood all those years ago, where the empty space had been, where the 4 small marks on the floor had never quite faded. His mother walked in and saw it and stopped walking. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. She touched the side of it the way you touch something you thought was gone for good and can't quite believe is real. Then she sat down on the sofa, the same sofa where she had once sat and dried her hands, and said she was sorry, and looked at him. He sat down at the piano. He adjusted the bench, and then he played the very first piece he had ever learned, the one he had memorized as a 7-year-old at the neighbor's old upright with the sticking key, the one he had practiced on cardboard in the dark, the one that had lived in his hands all through the years when there was nothing to play it on. He played it slowly and cleanly, every note in its place, the way you say something important when you finally have the words for it. His mother didn't speak. She just listened, her hands folded in her lap. her eyes full of something that was equal parts pride and relief and love, and the particular kind of peace that comes when a long, hard story finally arrives somewhere good. He played until the piece was finished. Then he sat quietly with his hands resting on the keys. The piano had been sold once to pay the bills, but the music, the real thing, the part that lived in him, had never been sold, had never been carried out, had never left that house, not even for a single day. And now, all these years later, it had simply come back home.